Hey everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make some fun dangly earrings using templates and flat slabs. So this is really beginner friendly. The fun thing about it is it doesn't take up much space at all. So you can use a small little area, it makes very little mess. And the really great part about it is that you can make a ton of them. So they're great gift options for later on in the year or just for friends while you're thinking about them in this hard time. So the first thing that you're going to do is gather materials. You'll need either X-Acto knife, scalpel, or if you have a really thin knife. I just personally prefer a scalpel and I'll use these over and over again. You'll want a needle tool, some scissors, scrap paper of any kind, use stuff out of the recycle bin that's been used before, rolling pin. This is just from my kitchen. Thank you, Rose Garden, for giving me this. And a little chunk of clay, and that should be everything. So I'm just gonna grab my little chunk of clay. So right now I'm using a porcelainous stoneware, but you can use any type of clay you have on hand. You don't need that much. I'm gonna start with just a little less than this. I'm just kind of squishing it into a ball, giving it some extra compression. And ideally you're using clay fresh out of the bag, but if you have recycled clay, just make sure you wedge it up super good. The nice thing about the slabs is you will see if there's any air bubbles, so no need to get super stressed about wedging. So then I'm just gonna kind of squish it into a flatter mound and then set that aside for now. I am going to make some templates, and that way I can make the same shape over and over again. So for this example, I'm using something slightly different than my original example, which are fun little dangly earrings. And these are done with the stoneware that have a blue glaze on top of them that I brushed on after they were bisque fired. So you can make any kind of shape. The fun part about this is you can try all kinds of different things and see what you like. But I'll just take my regular scissors and say I want to do something a little bit more geometric. I can kind of cut that out and then have that on hand. So I can make all kinds of different shapes. You will want to work a little bit bigger for this style, especially if you want to add a hole at the top to put some assemblage in later. Or you could just glue a backing and they'll be studs, but you want to make sure they're not giant if you're going to do that, but decent enough to where you might want to poke a hole later. So nothing itty bitty, because that'll be just painful to be patient with yourself on. So once I have my templates, I'm going to take that slab and then roll it out. So I kind of squished it down already. I'm going to take my rolling pin, and I usually start from the center and kind of wiggle it both horizontally and vertically to try to get it down a little bit more and evenly. I don't want to go full pressure first thing. That will just kind of make a thin spot in the middle. And then once I have it going, I'm usually flipping it over several times, especially if you're doing this right on your tabletop. The clay will start to stick a little bit, so you'll want to jump over to a dry spot, and especially while it's still thick. So again, I'm just kind of wiggling from the center because naturally that's going to be the thickest part of it, and then doing these kind of long motions through. I don't want to do full pressure and start to push it through because it will just be uneven. It seems pretty easy, but it does help to keep that in mind with rolling because you're trying to make it as even as possible. Keep track of the edge that you're using to grab it and flip it over. That is an area that we don't want to put our main piece on because it's been kind of warping around and moving a lot. Sometimes when those pieces are handled too much, when they're gonna dry, they'll want to warp in the kiln, so they'll kind of twist themselves out of place. So because these are earrings, it's okay to have a pretty thin slab. We're not gonna be moving them around too much after we cut them, so you will want to make it pretty thin. I usually aim for like 4 millimeters or so, depending on what I'm doing. Keeping in mind that the clay will shrink about 10%, so they'll be a little bit smaller than what you're making. And of course that depends on the type of clay you're using. Some will shrink about 11%, most stonewares, others might shrink about 14 to 15% if you're using like a specialty clay. But you should be able to look that up online if you just know the type of clay you have. So I'm just slowly working it down. I'm gonna flip it one more time. And when I'm flipping it, I'm going on the other side. So this has a little bit of roughness, you can see from sticking to the table. So I'm just gonna go 1 or 2 more times on that side to smooth it out. And then there's tiny, tiny little bumps. So I'm just gonna use my finger, almost the same I would a rip tool. So I have kind of flat part of my pad of my fingertip, and I'm just going, smoothing in one direction, coming back the other direction. I'm gonna do that a few times to just help compress the clay. We're working with such a tiny piece of clay that I wouldn't want to use a rib tool because I'm more likely to dent into it and make it too thin. So I'm just gonna do this several times. If you see little bubbles on there, you can take your needle tool, poke them, and then compress that bubble out. So no need to panic and feel like you have to start completely over again if you do get those little bubbles. So I have that pretty well prepped. And I am going to, again, handle from that same side and just move it over a little bit before I do my cutting. Make sure your table is clean on the spot that you put it back down on. So I want to try to eliminate any little lumps and bumps I might get, or like dry bits of clay that might want to stick back on there. Pop that down, just lightly tap it, and then I'm going to set my templates. So this general kind of outside centimeter I don't want to work with because it's been manipulated a lot. So I'll go a little bit into my slab. I'm going to press that template down. Let's just start with that first one. And then from here, I'm going to come in with my X-Acto knife or scalpel and cut around it. This one is especially curvy, so I'm doing kind of short angles. I can always slice the part that's excess away. And I'm not being too particular about the edge because I'm going to smooth that out later, but I want to get that shape going as much as possible. As you're peeling away the excess stuff, try to squish it together because we're working with such thin clay, it will want to dry out. So you probably don't want a lot of waste scraps that you can't use again. If you squish them up as you go, you'll be able to re-wedge them and reuse them. So, I'm just gonna get this out of the way for a minute. And then I have my general shape. So you can see it's like a rough outline of that. I'm gonna just go on the edges and kind of pat with my fingers to smooth out that shape. Especially when working this small, your fingers are the best tool because most tools are just gonna get in the way or cause other issues for you. So I'll usually kind of flatten it out just a little bit more, smooth using the very pads of my fingertips. Flip over And especially with that harsh side on the other side, I'll do the same. Because I don't want that sharp edge, especially what's going to be left unglazed, to be sitting close to my neck or face so that it doesn't like hit me and be an irritant later on. If you have like little edges you want to clean up, you can come back with your X-Acto knife and just kind of scoop those up. And then again, pat them down so it's the shape that you're looking for. Make it as smooth as possible at this stage. And if I want to, I can just keep working with this template and make like a zillion of these little buddies so that I have a whole set and pair. I'm just gonna smooth them out a little bit more. And then if, say I did want to add a hole at the top, I have to be very, very delicate about this. So I'm gonna just kind of lightly peel. Again, trying my best to not manipulate the clay a ton. And then you can see my little baby here. It's gonna get thinner and smaller. I'm gonna take my needle tool and go about 3 millimeters in to the top. I'm gonna poke through lightly, and when I see the very tip of that coming out, I'm gonna go and then meet on the other side. If I just jab it all the way through, I'm more likely to get little parts that will stick out, and then I have a lot more cleanup to do later. Remember that this hole is gonna shrink as well, so usually when it's in there, I'll do like a light circle motion just to open it up a little bit more so I can still get a piece of wire through that once it's fired, because it'll shrink a little bit more. So once you have your hole in there, you'll just fuss a little bit more, set it aside. If you have some thin plastic that's just in your recycle or like a Ziploc bag or something, I recommend just as you've made all of yours, put plastic at the end so it dries slowly. Generally with hand building, you want to slow down your whole drying process because the clay is less likely to warp and it's more likely to stay flat and in the shape that you originally made it in once it's drying and once it's fired. So I hope that you have fun with this. If you make some, please send us images. It's super fun to see the projects that people are coming out with. And then later we can go over assemblage, or you can send us some information once they're fired in a couple months to make sure that we can finish them for you. All right, well, I hope you have a good rest of your day and look forward to new projects with you.